Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 1. Hello, Podroonies or Podsters, if you prefer. We are back again for another episode. And as Furiosa is out in the cinemas, we are, of course, talking Anya Taylor Joy films. And as always, I am not talking alone. Why would I do that? Absolutely not. I am joined by guests Chris and Elle from Spoil My Movie podcast. How are you guys?
We're great. Thank you.
Good.
Excellent.
Happy to be here.
It's Elle, actually. Not
Elle,
Ellie.
sorry.
It's Elle like loser.
No, definitely not. Yeah, and I'm informed that you're recently married, which is amazing. Congrats.
We are.
We are.
It's like a month today.
I'm an
Wow.
honest woman now.
Excellent stuff. So, guys, you have a great podcast. I've listened to a few. Tell us about your podcast and where can we find you?
So we are Elle and Chris from Spoil My Movie podcast. We talk about movies. We break them down. We talk about the minutia. We talk about the emotionality. And we talk about relationships and, adjacent topics like criminal justice. Depends on what the movie's about. And you can find us across pretty much every podcasting platform, notably Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And then we are also on all sorts of social media, Facebook, Instagram. That's really where we live. But also TikTok and YouTube. Our back catalog right now is being posted to YouTube every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A new old episode.
And we're adorable.
Absolutely. So, Furiosa then, guys. What do we make of this one coming out? A prequel to Fury Road?
I'm very excited. Yeah, so we actually did an episode with Cultworthy Cinema because they chose Fury Road. And I have to be honest, I was kicking and screaming and I was like, I don't want to watch this. And then as I'm watching it, I'm like, is this like one of the best movies I've ever seen? It was like an intensive car chase, but it was like the best car chase. And I thought it was so beautiful and dynamic and well acted.
Hard hitting.
There was so many, like my adrenaline was up, but in the best way. And so I am really looking forward to this, not only because of that movie, but because I love Anya Taylor Joy. I think she's magnetic and stunning and such a great actress. I foresee great things, and I think this is just the beginning.
Yeah, I loved Fury Road. Just a great plot twist in that film where they turn left. That's it. I'm really excited for Furiosa as well. Again, like I'm getting to be quite a big fan of Anya Taylor Joy as well. I think she's becoming kind of like Zendaya and Margot Robbie, like a really big movie star. Like her choices are really interesting. Yeah, and George Miller very much focuses on like big vehicle action, and I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. What do you make of the new one, Chris?
I am cautiously optimistic because on the one hand, I've been done wrong by a lot of prequels just in life. It seems like almost every time there's a prequel, I'm like, well, unless it's Red Dragon.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Anya Taylor Joy, I think, is a fantastic actress. And I think she is becoming more so as she's given meatier and meatier roles. And so I hope that she will knock this one out of the park as an actress, even if the movie itself is less than stellar. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that I'm going to enjoy the movie overall. I'm very confident that I'm going to enjoy her performance.
I also think that Chris Hemsworth is going to be very interesting in a villain role. We always see him as the guy that comes and saves the day. So I look forward to something different.
Yeah, because he has been able to show his like comedy chops a little bit in like the recent Thor movies. So it's just really interesting to see, certainly from the trailer, that he feels like he can like create something wild and wacky in that kind of vein of more of the humorous Thor that we were seeing in the MCU. So yeah, that seems like it could be an amazing role for him in this movie. Yeah, it's just interesting with Furiosa as well, as that I've heard that it's supposed to be more of a sprawling epic, whereas in Fury Road it's like that only covered like 2 days. And also I heard that like Charlize Theron was like gutted that she wasn't asked to come back. And I think George Miller thought about casting her again, but like digitally de-aging her. But then George Miller saw Ang Lee's Gemini Man with Will Smith and he was like, no, let's not do that. So the technology I don't think is quite there yet to do such a big film. I know other filmmakers have done it. Notably, the one that's come into my head right now is The Irishman. But with that, like, Robert De Niro is an amazing actor, but him trying to play like a 40-year-old man when he is in his 70s just doesn't add up.
It didn't work.
Really.
Yeah. I don't think the technology crosses the uncanny valley just yet.
It's also like not all about the face. It's most body language is what communicates across, like to audiences. And when he was in that scene running to ditch a gun, he looked 100 years old moving. And, and it really breaks the movie for you in that moment. It takes you right out.
Yeah, so I'm really glad they cast Anya Taylor Joy, even though I am a little bit sorry for Charlize as well. But it still looks amazing, and I'm hopefully going to see it in a few days, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, same.
So, Anya Taylor Joy movies, then, of course, it's the guest's turn first. I absolutely say that every episode. So what film did you go for, guys?
We have chosen Last Night in Soho.
Nice. So, were there any other films in contention for you guys that didn't make the cut?
We did enjoy the menu very much, and I thought she was really great, but I felt like it was more Ralph Fiennes' movie at times. So
right.
And it wasn't like there were a lot of good things about it, but I felt like I had seen Last Night in Soho, so I knew that it was different in a lot of respects, and so I thought that this is more interesting, more unique in her resume of things.
Yeah. And I trusted her. I had not seen Last Night in Soho prior to watching it for this podcast, but I trusted her judgment, which is why I'm a happily married man.
Happy wife, happy life.
I sense some opinions coming. Had you seen the menu, Chris?
Yes, we actually recorded an episode of our podcast for the menu.
Yeah, I found it hilarious.
Hilarious. And mostly I thought it worked. There were a couple parts where I was like, okay, that's a little weak. But mostly I really enjoyed the Ralph Fiennes performance and the Anya Taylor Joy performance. I think the only weaknesses there were really in the writing. But
it made me hungry.
Yes, very hungry. Especially that burger at the end. I'm like, oh.
Yes.
I want that. Especially with the crinkled chips. Like, you don't get fries for you guys. Like, you don't get that very often. Like, from a restaurant, it's always just thin.
No.
So yeah, I was like, oh.
Well, like steak fries.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens in Last Night in Soho then, guys?
All right. Well, I did take some copious notes. We'll see if it's too much for us. But so Thomasin McKenzie plays Eloise Turner / Ellie, known as Ellie, for pretty much the rest of the movie. She's an aspiring fashion designer who lives with her grandmother, Grand Peggy, and has been mourning the death of her mother. she finds out she has been accepted to a fashion institute. Now, that's what we would call it stateside. Would you call it a fashion uni?
Yeah, we would call it a university, yeah, I guess.
Okay. So Ellie meets a creepy and possibly predatory cab driver. She then meets her new roommate, Jocasta, and she soon discovers she doesn't fit in with Jocasta or her friends. So she decides, after some awkward interactions, to get her own place. And she ends up renting a room from an older woman, Ms. Collins, played by Diana Rigg. And she soon starts to be fading into the 1960s. Whether these are visions or actual time travel or something, we're not immediately clear. But she starts to follow the woman in the reflection, who is Sandy. And Sandy wants to be a singer in the 1960s, and she catches the attention of Jack, played by Matt Smith, of Doctor Who fame for me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the pivotal moment of this interaction is that Ellie, wakes up with a hickey that Jack gave Sandy. So there is commonality of body here. And Sandy has an audition arranged by Jack to try and be a singer. And in the present, because we keep going back and forth to from the present to the 1960s, Ellie dyes her hair blonde like Sandy's. She applies to work as a bartender at the place that she saw in her vision of the 1960s. And she has an interaction with a strange old man who seems to recognize her. The next night in the 60s, Sandy is unhappily performing as a burlesque backup dancer. Jack has become abusive to her. Sandy's becoming more and more jaded and unhappy, and Jack forces her into prostitution. Ellie, in the present, goes to a Halloween party with romantic interest John, which is pretty funny because John is the guy in a prostitution interaction. So Ellie hallucinates. She sees ghoulish versions of Sandy's Johns. And then John comes home with Ellie, and she hallucinates again. And this was against the house rules. John ends up getting ousted by Mrs. Collins. Then the next day, Ellie apologizes to Ms. Collins, goes to the library to look up murders in that building in the 60s. She begins to hallucinate ghost men following her around the library, nearly leading her to stab Jocasta in the face with a pair of scissors.
She had it coming.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
And then Ellie tries to report the murders to the police, and they don't want to hear it. So Ellie confronts the old man at the bar, accusing him of murdering Sandy. He denies it and then gets hit by a car and dies. Ellie ends up getting roofied or poisoned or roofied by Miss Collins, who turns out to be Alexandra Sandy Collins. A struggle ensues, during which Ellie and John manage to escape while Miss Collins allows a house fire to consume her, and the movie ends with Ellie's fashion show. Her grandmother is in the audience, and she sees her mother's reflection smiling at her, and then she sees Sandy's reflection waving at her. The end.
Excellent stuff. Excellent. So, initial reactions, guys. Elle, let's go with you first. What do you make of this one?
I mean, I think it's a visually stunning movie, especially once you start to getting into those transitions from present day London to 60s London. So it becomes very psychedelic, and you're along for that ride and that trip. I'm very interested in finding out, like, what is the fate of Sandy? Why is this happening to Ellie? And Ellie is very terrified. Like, even though she's been living with this, like, kind of ghostly ability, she's losing her mind. And it's making her a target at school, for the mean girls. And it's, I think it's a very relatable role, especially for anybody with mental illness. So I enjoy watching her sort of trying to balance out this life of functioning, right? Trying to be a designer, trying to go for her dreams, while also indulging some of her ability, but also really trying to keep her frail mind from falling apart while she's doing these things.
Yeah, for me, I think this movie plays on something that I was actually in an independent movie years and years ago that I don't think it ever saw the light of day, but it revolved around the difference between waking reality and dream reality and blurring the lines between the two. And that was what I really liked about that script. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this movie. I think visually they did a lot to work within that dynamic where there's two different competing realities. And I found it visually to be very, not quite stunning, but very appealing. And I think there was a lot going for it. Notably, the performances of some of these actors were really good.
Yeah, I really liked it as well. I remember seeing it at the cinema with my buddy. A very different film to what you normally see, even from someone like Edgar Wright. I'm a big fan of his, and I know he's always kind of been into horror. Like Shaun of the Dead has always been half a horror film, half a comedy, for sure. I've got it in my horror section, to be honest, not necessarily comedy. Because there's some really dark stuff in there in that film towards the end, and there's certainly a lot of dark stuff in here. And like towards the end, it's kind of really challenging you about how you're supposed to see these characters, especially Sandy at the end. You're like, this is not like a simple film at all. It's quite complicated emotionally, but yeah, visually, I think it goes back to Edgar Wright's references. I think he was saying that it goes back to some of the like Italian giallo thrillers from Italy in like the 70s and 80s, if not earlier. I've not seen many of them, only really Suspiria. So that was kind of really interesting to hear that. And visually, you can definitely feel that very striking sense of that, I guess. And it has a very unique quality, certainly towards the end, and very vivid in terms of its colors and very psychedelic. I'm not sure, like, everything kind of adds up at the end. Maybe, I'm not sure. I mean, I've seen it a few times, and there's just a lot going on in this film, and there's just a lot to unpack. And I feel like sometimes I can see like Edgar Wright fighting his own impulses. There's a few sequences that we'll get into, I think, that you can definitely tell that, yeah, this is pure Edgar Wright. And some of it, like certainly towards the beginning, you're like, yeah, he's being super restrained right here and just trying to kind of, in quotes, being a proper director, maybe. I mean, that's kind of a terrible way of putting it, but yeah, it's just very different for him, like doing a kind of a straight horror film with no real comedy in there at all. So I definitely appreciate this very, very different style from Edgar Wright. For the most part, I think it really holds up. And it's got tremendous rewatch value as well, which I always really enjoy those types of films. So directing then, like, I think for me, like the first dream sequence in that Soho club is brilliantly done. Super slick direction from Edgar Wright, like technically really amazing. And I think if you watch really closely, there are some moments in that kind of dance number where Matt Smith is dancing with Anya Taylor Joy and Thomas and Mackenzie, and they're kind of switching out. There's one occasion where you can see like Thomas and Mackenzie, like, you know, being dragged away, and whilst Anya Taylor Joy is still in shot, but like, because this is not my first time viewing it, knowing that that's all kind of all in camera and it's all about the choreography, I was kind of looking for that kind of stuff. So I think you only really see that if you're looking for it, but that's just on me, really. But yeah, I think technically it's just really great in that first sequence. And then it just asks like so many questions about what the hell is going on. Like, is she embodying Anya Taylor-Joy's character Sandy? You know, what's going on here with all the mirrors and stuff? You know, and obviously going into the technical stuff, like certainly in those hallway bits, there was no mirror. They're just using the twins from Harry Potter. And Thomas and Mackenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy are actually there on set, you know, mimicking each other. So all that stuff was great. But yeah, it's just such a great opening, like, dream sequence, or however you want to call it, for me.
Well, and that's an interesting thing, is that, like, from a directing standpoint, I have a lot of respect for the fact that it initially appears that these are dreams. And if they're dreams, then you could put all the stuff that doesn't make sense, it doesn't quite line up, you could put it into the dream world and you say, well, it's a dream.
Right.
But then as it becomes clear that these are not dreams, that they're actually memories, then they have to hold up. They have to be consistent with their implications in the present and consistent with themselves in the 60s. So I think that's a really difficult thing to convey visually and to make sense screenplay wise.
Yeah. I think the third dream sequence is definitely a big turning point for me in the film, because in the first like two sequences in the 60s, Ellie is just kind of experiencing this world for the first time and using these kind of dreams as a way of escaping her reality in modern London. But when like Ellie sees that Sandy has basically been tricked to perform this really like sleazy marionetta, it's like all of a sudden Ellie's comfort place is so much worse than her real life as a student all of a sudden. And after like the dance sequence, like Ellie and Sandy interchange a lot more, to the point where I think we see more of Ellie than we do Sandy in this red dress. Like we have this like amazing long take as Ellie goes from room to room and she sees a woman like shooting up drugs. Someone literally is unconscious and someone else is giving head. Each one feels pretty shocking as it's so brief. So I like how Edgar Wright kind of mixes the horror, and you still have like the intrigue of what's happening with Ellie, especially when we see for the first time Ellie interacts with someone from the 60s. So when she shouts like, no, this man like trying to touch Sandy while she's sleeping, and he looks up at Ellie, then you get that good but not great like jump scare with the fake out waking up from a dream shot where like the same guy catches her hand trying to turn off the alarm. So your thought is like, you know what was happening with these dream sequences, but like another layer is added that these two worlds are kind of colliding now for Ellie, that there's an awareness there from these creepy guys that Ellie is kind of invading their world or whatever. There's still a lot of questions to be asked, but like that sequence certainly is a big turning point for me.
I agree. I think that's one of my favorite, when she explores sort of the bowels of this job, right? Like, and this setting.
Yeah.
I feel like she's really sheltered. She's like a girl that's ready to go to school, very much in that innocence of, she barely has any experience in life except losing her mom and struggling like possibly with mental illness or, this sort of like ability, right? And so she has all of the optimism of a college student, and she has all of these idealizations probably planted by her mother and her grandmother about the 60s. And so she's so excited to dive into that. She's ready to go to bed. Like it's not even like time for bed, and she's in there because she's going on a trip. She's just so excited. And so her disillusionment grows with each transition to the 60s. And then she's hit with the real horror and reality of what life for a woman is like in that era, what life has been like for women up until her present day. And it's that there are a lot of people willing to take advantage of innocence. There are a lot of people willing to make money or, reap the benefits from your naivete, So she's like walking through these hallways and seeing the real horrors of what it's like for these people using drugs, being sold into prostitution, like, being trafficked and whatnot, like all these things. And it is horrible. It's absolutely horrible, especially when you come from a sheltered life and you don't know about things like that. And, she idealized Sandy and that world so much, not ever understanding that, that there was this very corrupt underground the whole time.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of an analog in this scene of her walking down this hallway and seeing all these little, they're not vignettes, but these little shots of this debaucherous act and that debaucherous act. reminded me a lot of your movie because there were those flashes of the this scene and that scene. So in your movie they came more staggered, and in this movie they came all in one sequence. But I thought that there was a lot of similarity between the two.
Yeah, certainly with this film, you're getting like snapshots kind of like all at once. You're like, whoa, like the veil has been completely lifted for Ellie. This is not like the idealistic 60s that you thought it was. It's got a big dark underbelly that she's only really just discovering. And yet we still not really sure how this kind of 60s world fits in with our own world. Just that it's starting to collide a bit now. And then I kind of love that sequence where Ellie, the one of the dream sequences where Ellie doesn't actually choose to enter it, like where she just goes to her bedroom and Matt Smith just like turns up and drags her to this club as Sandy. Then you have this like great like psychedelic colors in the shots on Sandy dancing away with loads of like costume changes. Then Ellie kind of decides that she could change Sandy's fate by trying to break the glass, and she hugs Sandy. Then we go straight to like the bedroom again, but you immediately think that she hasn't woken up yet because the sign that changes color from that French bistro from red, yellow, and white is just flashing red. But in fact, she is awake and she sees Sandy in the mirror waiting for guys to come to her bed, but the creepy guys with no faces are coming for Ellie. So it's just a great creepy design of those guys, especially with that intense like red lighting. And I love the jump scare where there's loads of guys in the room when Ellie opens the door again. Love that. So now both these worlds are like properly colliding for Ellie, and she can't like control when it happens anymore. No. So then the film kind of, she just doesn't know where to turn from this point on. And then you kind of get this great like chase sequence through the library. And then in that like kind of like that little alleyway with the faceless creepy dudes.
I love the faceless creepy dudes.
I liked it a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I find them a little bit much.
Okay.
It's definitely more like the Edgar Wright we know, but like the tone of the action felt a bit off for me. I don't know. I think it was a lot. I was thinking a lot about like Shaun of the Dead, like the way she gets caught in that alley by those faceless guys, and then she's able to like free herself quite easily. And it just didn't feel right for me. But again, like the neon look to it and the creativity in those shots are kind of amazing, with the fact that Edgar Wright is like messing with the characters' perspectives in that scene, especially because you're never really sure if Matt Smith is actually looking at Ellie or Sandy in that alleyway. So that was really great. But I don't know, just the way the action is directed, especially in the library for me, less so the alleyway. But again, she gets away really quickly.
Do you think it was overused? Like the men with the faces? Do you feel like that there was too much of their presence?
Possibly. I think certainly the first time I watched it, I think it's definitely overused. And I mean, I really like the design of it, and it definitely makes a lot of narrative sense. But I think what Edgar is going for is just kind of this thing where, because we're learning that this 60s world is basically colliding with her own, and she just can't control it anymore. He's trying to put across this sense that there's nowhere she can turn anymore until she basically is just driven to the police emotionally. So I think that's what he's going for. But I just felt like they didn't particularly feel that threatening.
Mm-hmm. Well, and doesn't that fit though? Because as you discover later on, they want her to avenge them. And, if they're not actually the enemy they appear to be, then it makes sense that she's able to get away. And some of the things that seemed weak actually, I think, fit better once you have that knowledge from later on.
I think I partly agree with Martin here, because
okay.
I do agree with that part that they're trying to tie the ending. However, I feel like the number of men in the first scene when Ellie's discovering that Sandy is a prostitute and she has been sleeping with numerous men, and they all say, you have such a lovely name or something like that. That's a lovely name. Like that is really when you feel the weight of it all. Like, you know, how this person's dream was just, you know, destroyed, and this is what she does on a nightly basis. And it's hundreds of guys. So I felt like having all those men, one after another, one shape after another, really then, you know, gave us that shock value. And then having them littered all over the movie afterwards really diluted their presence. So that, you know, like it's kind of like once you see the monster in a monster film, it's not scary anymore, because now you know what it looks like. It's always scarier when there's still that aspect of mystery, and I think that they sort of took that away in the film. However, how are you going to move this further along if they're not present in the movie?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very difficult balancing act that Edgar's got to deal with here, because I agree with you, Chris, as well, that like they don't, when you learn the whole truth about what's going on with these guys, they're not trying to kill her. They want her help to try and kill Sandy. But you don't really get that sense when you're in the scene watching it for the first time. So it's a little confusing, and it kind of goes into that kind of comedy horror thing that you see in Shaun of the Dead. Like you could easily put that kind of scene without all of obviously the neon stuff in Shaun of the Dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the you know, the kind of zombie-esque like movements of the guys, you know.
Yeah, the fact that she can escape so easily, you know. But yeah, have you guys got a favorite scene or a favorite shot?
Oh,
I do. I mean, I loved a lot of shots. Like my first favorite shot was when she's in bed and she's being pulled into that world for the first time. There's a very elongated sort of mattress sheet sort of moment where she's in there and it pulls away.
Oh, yeah. I love that. Yeah.
And it just looks so stunning and unusual. But if I were to say that there's a favorite shot for me, it's the one where Sandy is descending the stairs of the club for the first time, and the reflection is there showing Ellie in the background. And it's that beautiful swirling staircase, that stunning pink dress that she has. Pink is my favorite color.
Really? Okay.
That's a really pretty like movie poster moment, I think.
Yeah, that works. For me, when... Who is getting stabbed now? I don't even recall. I was just like...
I think it was Sandy.
It was Sandy stabbing John? No,
it was John initially.
Or John stabbing Sandy.
Initially. Yeah.
But you see the eyes reflected on the blade every time it comes down.
Oh, yeah. That's mine, yeah.
I thought that was just beautiful. I love that shot. But, I mean, like, kind of every reflection, every scene where there was some kind of reflection, it was so well done every time.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, certainly visually, like the ending is just amazing. I especially liked that they didn't like hold back at all when like the real Sandy is like talking about how she killed all these men, and they don't hold back with the knife action and blood. It seems to be going everywhere. I know it kind of like the lighting kind of dilutes the blood a little bit, which is interesting, but it still looked amazing and kind of graphic. That was great. And they kind of really utilize the mirror thing where in the bedroom, like the faceless men like break through the walls, and it's like they're breaking through glass sometimes, like the glass is like the wall between these two worlds, and it's pretty relentless and very like vivid with all the neon red lighting. Another thing that this film does like well is like the cross-cutting between like the real world and what Ellie is seeing in this like ghostly 60s world. Like I love the staircase scene where it's somehow transformed into this kind of stage, and it's the only thing in the scene, and of course it's kind of made of glass. And they kind of switched from that between that with Anya Taylor Joy, Sandy, and like Diana Rigg. And that's always kind of really seamless. And obviously she's climbing up the real staircase. And it never felt jarring, those cuts. Really felt nice and seamless.
The editing I thought was really good. Like It's a really difficult task set in front of you to edit this in a way that is artistic and also makes sense and also has the effect of blurring that divider between these two decades. There was one moment that, among some really great editing, one moment that set off the pedant in me, and it was when Ellie is first in the room. And really, it's every time that she's in the room at night and you can see the lights of the bistro sign, which are the same colors as the French flag. So it's going red and white and blue and red. And then an edit hits every time there's a cut. It interrupts that very regular sequencing. And it's red and white and red and blue and white and blue. And it really, every time, it bothered me. I'm like, come on.
I didn't even notice. I noticed a lot of red, but I had also kind of, I thought about Kill Bill for whatever reason. That sequence when she starts to kill and they switch to black and white and they make it very
silhouette.
They mute the violence that way. I felt like like we were seeing more red because there was more bloodshed, and the bloodshed was made to look artistic. Like we weren't at any point looking at really grotesque horror scenes. Like everything was made to look artsy. And so I just thought that the red was really there just to kind of, mask the blood, but also to just represent the gore,
You can go with that.
My opinion.
Are you saying that as a negative then, or a positive?
I think it goes because I think that it would have taken you out of the movie to see some really nasty fluorescent lighting all of a sudden. Like you get that when she's in school, that makes a lot of sense. You're in an institution in that day, and at those points she's pretty safe. You know what I mean? So I thought that they were making it as psychedelic and artsy as possible, and it fit with the movie. If you had just like suddenly like hospital blood like all over, that kind of like dark, like oxidized looking blood, I don't think it would have gone with the movie at all.
No, I agree. And also when she goes up and sees, her room for the first time and you see these flashing lights from the bistro, I'd be like, nope, I'm finding somewhere else. There's no way I'll be able to get any sleep.
That's exactly what I said.
We were like, I need those like blackout curtains.
How does she get any sleep?
I would lose my mind.
No wonder she's hallucinating the 60s.
Like we've had to run a fan in our bedroom at night, and like before, we like jump into AC territory, and he's pulled back the curtain, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" At 5 a.m, I see sun. This is not okay.
Directing score for me then, I'm going to go fairly high. I don't think this is like Edgar Wright's like best movie, but I really appreciate like the really different style here that he's going for. So, and for the most part, I think a lot of this stuff works, and you just don't see this type of movie very often. So I'll go like an 8.5 for me.
Really? That is exactly what we came up with.
We're psychically linked.
Okay.
And one thing we didn't mention was the music. I thought the musical picks were absolutely fantastic. Maybe not the budget of like a Forrest Gump, but similarly great choices in music, and it was just one after another after another.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that.
What I really liked about the music was a couple of things. It sets up Ellie as different because she's not listening to what her peers are listening, and she's really, really enamored with that period, but it sets her up to be an old soul. But because you have that setup, she transitions herself into the 60s very seamlessly.
Oh, yeah.
And so absolutely. I felt like it just really did a lot to set her apart from her peers.
Right. Screenplay then. What I found interesting about the beginning of this film is that we learn very early on that Ellie can see her dead mother in the mirror, but seemingly can't talk back to her. So Ellie has some sort of like paranormal powers in seeing dead people. But the film makes a conscious effort not to focus on that with Ellie. It's more about like her struggles with fitting in modern London life, that no one else seems to like the 60s lifestyle like Ellie does. Yet there's no like communication with her mum using her powers to like seek comfort. Like she gets a lot of that from her gran instead. So, the film suggests from her gran near the beginning that seeing her mum from beyond the grave has caused some issues maybe in the past. It's not, it's a little subtle there, but that's what I got, which is kind of understandable, to be fair. So it's just really interesting that the supernatural element is not the focus at all until like the first dream sequence, which I found really interesting. Usually in a lot of these type of films, that's the main thing, but it's not here at all.
Yeah, I think this is such a interesting dynamic when it comes to cultures. Like this is in a more English backdrop, but typically every culture handles mental illness very differently. And there's a lot of like interplay between like the ghosts that people see and like the belief that somebody's ill. So like in Latino culture, I can tell you that when people pass and we see ghosts, that's very normal for us. Nobody goes and rushes you to the hospital and says, you're not bathing, you're not doing well. If I said I saw grandma, a few weeks after she passed, that would be like, oh my gosh, she saw grandma and grandma had this message, and nobody would rush to get me medicated, right? But here, America, I think parts of Europe, like it's, maybe there's an understanding that she has this ability, but it also can be processed as, when you're really upset and overwhelmed, you don't do well. You have episodes, you see things that nobody else sees, and maybe you start to neglect some stuff and you start to go into crisis. You don't sleep well. Like there's a lot to contend with there.
Yeah. Right. I mean, as far as the screenplay, I think story structure, especially at the beginning, was a little bit by the numbers, except that Jocasta didn't play a larger role because that wasn't the focus of the story. So in retrospect, that makes perfect sense. But it seemed to have familiar thriller beats, like the third act discovery that the villain or the supposed villain is not really the villain. I feel like they should have just cut that out entirely and devoted that time. Well, I don't think it added that much except predictability. And when it happened, I was like, oh, so that's the dead end. I wish if they needed to have a dead end because she's not a detective, then I feel like they should have written something in there that was different, like a breath of fresh air, something that smacked of normality in real life.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't mind that aspect. I mean, I think what makes like Edgar Wright like such a great writer is that you have, there's a lot of intrigue here about what the hell is going on with Ellie's like supernatural powers, and you're always asking yourself, why are these two worlds in the 60s and her present like colliding like this? Why is the starting point always in this bedroom and where she's staying? And you have all that, and then Ellie sees Sandy get killed by her pimp Jack, played by Matt Smith. So then all of a sudden the film becomes kind of a murder mystery film in the form of who is Jack in the present day, like kind of like what you were saying, Chris. And Terrence Stamp is the obvious candidate, so it's quite a surprise when he gets killed by that cab. But then that would have been too obvious and unsatisfying if it was him anyway. So you're left wondering, where is this film going? Plus you have things that still don't really add up, where these faceless creepy guys keep going for Ellie. Why is that? But so I love how you think you're watching one film and it kind of becomes something completely different, from like, a time hopping horror to a kind of a murder mystery horror.
Yeah.
With, more questions on top of that, yet like the tone of the film kind of still is intact for me. There's not many writers where they would introduce kind of this murder mystery element so late in the day in the script. And for me, I think it works well.
It also, I think, lends a little more mystery. The fact that there are that character who she presumes is Jack is alive, but she's seeing these old people, these ghosts, that people that you presume are ghosts.
Yeah, she doesn't care about all those people. She just wants to know who Jack is.
Right. But it does, like, it lets you know that there is something more going on than just her ability to see ghosts, because like she's seeing a younger version of a guy that she presumes is alive for most of the movie.
It's interesting what you say, Chris, if you kind of like take that element out, because then where does it kind of go? Like, how does she get back to just like finding the truth of what's going on with Sandy? You know, I feel like there's not a huge amount of, because then all you have is kind of like these worlds colliding. Yeah, it's a difficult one, really. Yeah,
it is. I mean, you think about like, okay, if this happened to you, where would you go for information? She went to the library. But this movie came out in what, 2021?
Yeah.
So the internet's a thing. And she didn't do that. Now, granted, internet searching does not make for good filmmaking in general. But I'm saying there are other avenues besides this library scene that she could have gone through. Like, check with the local police precinct for their records. That could be an entire sequence, even if it becomes a dead end, even if she gets stonewalled by the police. That still shows her pursuing multiple avenues to try and find the truth.
It's like a little too stuck and literal on her character, like that she loves listening to records and doing things the old-fashioned way.
So she goes to the library.
Right. So she goes through the microfiche section of the library like the way you used to 20 years ago, maybe more, you know? And so I think it's a little literal for her, you know? She's probably developing her films at Rite Aid or whatever, you know, and local pharmacy, you know, using those old school disposables. Like, who knows? I feel like they purposefully did not want to make her modern, like the most modern thing. Like, in fact, that was one of the things that was confusing watching this, even the second time. I was like, what era is she in? Is this the 90s? And then I see the beats on her ears. Yeah. And I was just like, no, these are Dre's. She's so old in her interests. Like not so much like, no, she's an old soul, I would say, but like her interests are all in this stuff that has become antiquated, that she almost pulls you into an older era herself.
Oh yeah. Right. I was definitely pulled into that. Yeah. I do like the 60s myself, to be honest. So when you kind of find out that like Terrence Stamp like was a cop and not like the older version of Jack, you feel pretty stumped. You're like, I don't know how this film is going to end. But of course, moments later, Miss Collins reveals the truth to Ellie when she tries to leave, that Miss Collins was in fact Sandy and actually killed Jack. And all of these other men in that room, you know, she killed her. But she killed them, sorry. But what I found really interesting is that when Ellie is being attacked in that bedroom by the faceless men, they're asking for help from Ellie and asking Ellie to kill Sandy. So then the film becomes very emotionally complicated and challenges you as an audience for a second, that you feel sorry for these men, that they've been murdered. Then when Sandy, Diana Rigg, comes into the bedroom, we see all of these men's faces for the first time, and Matt Smith's ghost kind of slaps Sandy like she's remembering a memory, and Jack says something like, you brought this on yourself. So then Ellie tries to get like Sandy out, but she says she's been in prison her whole life. So it's just really interesting how you go from finding out the truth that Sandy killed all these men for a good reason, but it's kind of villainized by the fact that she's trying to kill Ellie, our hero. So the truth, you know, can't come out to the rest of the world. So then you get this uncomfortable feeling of the film making you feel sympathetic towards these guys for like a second, but they also kind of look quite pathetic that they're pleading for help. So then like Sandy is accepting her fate in dying in her house for real this time, because she said that she felt like she died every time in that room. So for me, it's quite sad and complicated. and a complicated ending for Sandy. A very emotionally complicated ending with no real right answer.
I think also kind of polluting our feelings is the fact that Sandy, the older Sandy herself, was trying to kill our star, Ellie, poisoning her and going to do it mercifully, but still in the interest of protecting herself. And I think that that's the only reason that we have that moment with the men, because what happens with the men, the way they treat her, the way she's pimped out is truly horror. And this is the fate of so many people that want to make it big in the entertainment industry. And, we're now seeing stories, right, about like on Nickelodeon, how these children were treated and like, how people's innocence is squandered and really devastated. And so like, I think truly, I don't think we would have had that moment had the old woman not tried to poison and kill Ellie. I think we would have been like, fuck those guys.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really liked how emotionally complex it was at the end, because you do feel some kind of sympathy for the Johns, but on the other hand, they're responsible for the quote-unquote death of Sandy in that room 100 times.
Yeah.
And you feel bad for Sandy, but on the other hand, she's killed all of them and trying to kill Ellie. It's not a simple equation. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's got exponents and parentheses. Right. This equation is more complex.
Algebra now.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's just very daring, the fact that you are giving these men, like these horrible men, a voice, like just a brief one at the end. Even doing that is quite like, whoa, I did not expect that at all. And it's just like,
it does challenge.
Yeah, because when you look at it in bare bones, like Sandy is a serial killer. She's killed an awful lot of people, but at the same time, for good reason. Right. She's kind of like, in a way, an anti-hero figure, but really suffering as well.
I mean,
so
it's hard to watch her demise because she has star quality. She is stunning and magnetic.
Diana Rigg.
And just like polarizing, right? Like you just like really, really are drawn by her. She could have made it. She could have, if she had just landed with the right person in the right lane, and then she also sunk her feelings into the wrong person, who was a real piece of work. And, so like to see her, go from this person that really could have gotten all those things, but was used and abused, made it feel satisfying that she did get the upper hand at some point. I think like I would have been like, oh, well, whatever. They had it coming. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like had it not been for that one scene with the tea, I would have been like, I wouldn't have had that moment of like sympathy for them, the men.
Yeah.
Funny lines, interesting lines then, people. I kind of liked the one near the start between Jocasta and Ellie, where like Jocasta's like, so where are you from? And Ellie's like, Red Roof, it's in Cornwall. I'm sorry. Cornwall in the countryside. No, I heard you, babes. I'm just sorry. Which I think is a bit harsh, but there we go. And just a simple one like, Soho's to Soho. That was cool.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I said that in my uni days. But
I found in terms of this movie, I didn't find a ton of clever lines, but I thought that the one where Eloise is like, has a woman never died in the room upstairs or whatever? And Miss Collins responds, this is London. Someone has died in every room and every building and on every street and every street corner in the city. And I was just like, yeah, like London's a pretty, has a real dark past. So I thought that was a very, like her nonchalant response to that, I thought was really clever.
Yeah. I really liked when Ms. Collins is laying out the house rules, and she says that there's no male visitors after 8 p.m. And Ellie says something to the effect of, nobody's got, I'm not going to have anybody. I don't know anybody. It's fine. And Miss Collins goes, good. And it's just kind of like guttural.
Yeah, we both laughed because it was so voluminous. Like,
good. Almost like she was clearing her throat.
Yeah.
But you know what I really like about that older Miss Collins, though, is that like you just write her off as a prude from the beginning, right? No men upstairs, because she's just this old-fashioned woman from the 60s, in that era. Again, people were like, there's this underbelly going on, but people like to pretend like
old ladies are celibate, okay?
Right. but like, right. Yeah, okay. Most old ladies I know.
I need to believe this.
would have like 10 kids, just saying. Like, But like in the
start digging, Chris.
In the 60s, people loved to pretend they were so pristine and just so well-to-do, and just like that their behavior was top-notch and all proper. That, and they were prim and proper. So when she says no men visitors, you're just like, she's one of those women from that era that and that was the culture. But then when you realize that she was a prostitute and her trauma is living upstairs, the ghost of her of her past is living upstairs, then you're like, yeah, no male visitors. Like makes total sense, lady.
Absolutely. I think my favorite line is from Terence Stamp, and I think Edgar Wright has talked about this as well when he was doing his research on Hot Fuzz, I think, when he was talking to cops. And a real cop apparently said this line, and he used it for Terence Stamp's character, where he says in the bar, I think, with Ellie, and he says, but at the end of the day, you all look the same on a slab.
Yep.
I really like that.
It sounds like a real cop thing to say.
Yep.
Yeah. Apparently someone said that. So screenplay score for me, yeah, I think it's definitely not one of his best screenplays, but it's still really interesting. And again, like with a lot of Edgar Wright screenplays, it's very intricate and there's a lot of plot threads in here. And for the most part, I think it is really satisfying and it works. And the fact that it is really emotionally challenging at the end makes it, very different from a lot of his other films. So yeah, it's interesting. I think I will go with like an 8.2. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. How about you guys?
Well, for us, I agree. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot that's interwoven. There's a couple of misweaves. It was a lot to take on. So respect for taking it on. But I think we're going to have to go with an 8 as far as the screenplay.
Cool. Excellent. Right, acting then. I think Anya Taylor Joy is kind of brilliant in this film because I think even with like the dream sequences, the focus is mostly on like Thomasin McKenzie and where she is in the scene and how is she like interacting in the 60s. But I love this fast-paced dance sequence that's quite psychedelic, but you can tell she's not enjoying it at all.
Right.
Like, she just looks glum-faced and a little unhinged towards the end of that sequence. So, yeah, just a great performance from her, especially in that scene. And Anya Taylor Joy just has this kind of elegant, like, movie star quality that you can't really put your finger on it. But, yeah, I feel like if she was a genuine movie star in the 60s, no one would question it.
No.
Like, looking back now, you're like, yeah, she's from the 60s.
It fits. It definitely fits. Yeah. I really liked Anya Taylor Joy's performance. I think I liked Ellie better. Thomasin McKenzie. Yeah. I really like all the credit to her for pulling that off, because I think she threaded the needle as far as that transition from the lower grade mentally ill individual at the beginning who you can just kind of see or foresee that London is going to eat her up and she's going to get lost and killed in London.
Like a hot dog.
Yeah. Maybe that's a New York thing, but I don't know. But
we would say like bangers and mash.
There you go.
And she really she makes that transition to what you see at the end, where she's accomplished and successful and confident in herself. And I think that transition,
she feels really grown up.
yeah, but it's not just, snap your fingers and she's there.
Yeah.
It's a real transition. And I very much appreciated that. And that's not an easy task.
Yeah.
But I also enjoyed Matt Smith. And I really want to point this out, because I've pointed this out in a number of our podcasts that involve people singing, that they are not singing. I understand that the audio is going to be overdubbed after the fact. I'm okay with that, because Naomi Ackie does not sound like Whitney Houston. Nobody sounds like Whitney Houston. But when you're on the camera, you need to sing, because your larynx is going to do certain things. And what I really appreciated was Anya Taylor Joy was singing. It was overdubbed. It may have been overdubbed with her own singing. I honestly don't know.
It sounded like her.
But she was singing on that camera, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think Anya, is such a powerful actress. I look forward to her career, like beyond Furiosa, because I feel like that's going to be the clincher, really, where everybody's going to look at everything she does. But I see Oscars in her future. She's a natural actress. She's amazing. And just like Queen's Gambit was one of my favorite things. Like watching her is always a joy. But Ellie's character, I forgot her name. But the person who played Thomasin McKenzie
from New Zealand.
She has to work really hard to match like what Anya can do so naturally. Like Anya doesn't have to work very hard to squeeze out a tear or, a line. Like she is just so good just naturally. And Ellie's working her ass off to have screen presence to be able to match. And I think she does that by really acting so terrified. What I love from her is the gutturalness of her voice. When those screams have such a girth almost to them, for lack of a better word. But when she screams, it's like, it's like a really intense and very guttural kind of sound. And she'll be like, get away from her. And when she does, it's really right. It like rings in your ears. Like she does such a great job, and you really do feel like this person's terrified. And the fact that she's able to be like on that equal footing with Anya through the movie, I thought was impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely on equal playing field in those dream sequences, and if not, sometimes surpassing her, like in terms of her emotionality. Yeah, like I agree with those like guttural screams. Like you feel like that's, end of the day, last take type of screams. Like she's really not holding anything back.
No.
Yeah. I got to mention Terrence Stamp again. I think he's just amazing in that last scene with Thomasin McKenzie. But I do feel like he sometimes his line delivery does feel a little slow and unnatural, and you feel like he's just kind of reading the lines. But when Ellie starts like accusing him of like murdering Sandy in the basement, I love the way kind of his face drops and goes into General Zod mode. then you're like, Ellie, watch your step, because he may look old, but now it feels like you can't mess with him anymore.
Right. Like you're pushing it.
He definitely brings like a real presence to this film, that he's really lived a life. And even though you don't really know his identity, and he definitely brings off this kind of mystique quality. But yeah, he's just, he's great, I think.
He is. I also really liked Ellie's transition to blonde in that white coat, and then out of being blonde. It kind of coincided with her character's feeling of adoration for the 60s through her visions of the 60s. There's a point where she's like, wow, this is great. I get to go back in my dreams or visions or what have you and experience this. And then as it turns sour, she doesn't want to be blonde anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Favorite performance, Elle? What are you going for?
I It is Ellie for me. I think that she was written in a way to really allow herself to perform the shit out of this role. Like, and she did. She did. Like, she was. You were never. You were always feeling something with her. You were always feeling worried about her. Like, is this girl gonna break? Like, or make it? Or, she has talent. Like you're concerned. Like, is she gonna die? Like, is she gonna fall under the pressure of school and mental health issues? And then, like, she's truly terrified. Like, even with the overuse of the faceless ghosts, like, you still feel like this girl is scared out of her mind, in fight flight mode from the moment that things start till the end.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really tough between Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor Joy. I think Anya Taylor Joy kind of has a tricky job here because she's not really supposed to be the focus in those kind of dream sequences. She is and she isn't. We're following Ellie through the scenes, and sometimes they have to share the scene, and the focus is always kind of changing. It's a very difficult task for both of these actresses, but yeah, I think I'll probably go with Thomasin McKenzie as well as Elle as my favorite performance, because I think I think she's pretty much in every single scene, and she really carries it. And as you say, there's you can definitely feel like there's real growth to her character, and the way she holds herself in those last few scenes as a proper like fashion designer. You can really feel a real change there in her. I mean, it's not just, I don't think it's just like costuming and hair with that. There's a real confidence that she kind of brings to her performance at the end from what she's gone through.
Totally.
So yeah, I'll go with her. Chris?
I always have to like couch my analyses and say, well, I really, really like this except for, and then I kind of blanked out when it came to Thomasin McKenzie. I really liked everything about her performance. That I couldn't find, that was the weak moment. There was no the weak moment. It really was a performance that rang true, start to finish. I think it was probably a really difficult task. I think she benefited from a well-written character, but I think she knocked it out of the park. I think it was not an easy thing to do, especially side by side with Anya Taylor Joy.
Yeah.
Like, when you need these two characters to be like a Jean Valjean and a Javert to be at the same level, you really don't want to have one be much better than the other. And she held her own.
She did. And I even loved just the moments with grandma and the moments with the old woman. Like, you were convinced this was a girl that really respected the elderly, even. You know what I mean? Like, her character was so intricate that even in those moments, the way she talked to her, the way she tried to be polite, the way she was trying to get her deposit, but like in the nicest way possible. And you believed every moment with her.
Absolutely. To the scores then for acting. This is, it's pretty strong. It's really strong. Oh, is it better than directing? I don't know, man. I'm going to go with the same as directing, I think. 8.5 for me.
We are going to give it an 8.6. It was just like, cool. The acting was one of the stronger things, I think, in this film.
Yeah, just a bit better than the directing.
Awesome. Right, let's add up the scores then for Last Night in Soho.
Downtown.
Last Night in Soho gets 50.3.
Okay.
Which is pretty good out of 60. Yeah, this could be a tight one. Okay. Let's see in the next part.
Excellent.
That's it for part 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 2 to see who wins. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favorite films are relating to the episode. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.